Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about.
I'm curious about
I'm curious about building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about.
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
I was talking about just around like movement and getting more in touch with my body. And I was like, maybe I need to like journal about it or go to therapy or like talk through it. And you're like, no, you need to go dance. Like you can't think about your body and think about being in your body and write about being in your body. You're like, be in your body.
Exactly. Hi, welcome to the Curious Folks podcast. This podcast is for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Effy Blue.
And I'm Jacqueline Misla, and on today's episode, Effy and I are going to explore New Year's resolutions and the idea of New Year, New You. And while we don't ascribe to either of those ideas, actually, the new year does present a good opportunity to explore something new.
Yeah.
I think what appeals to me the most about the idea of something new is that I'm hoping that it's going to mean something in or around me feels different. The new year, quite frankly, was pretty anticlimactic.
I know.
And it was like 3, 2, 1. The same.
I know.
Everything's
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah.
So I'd like something to feel like new and cool, like something exciting to look forward to. I feel excited. I feel excited about the possibility of newness in this year. I'm also hesitant though, because I don't know how much change or learning curves this change strategist can take.
Well, it's a part of the job. It's a part of the job. I feel like you're living your job. So
True. Putting my money where my mouth is.
Exactly. I mean, I agree with you on the anticlimactic part. I mean, I rave on about New Year's Eve. It is important to me. So, like, from a mental place, I love the idea of New Year's Eve. It's a almost universally celebrated time of transition, and it's secular most of the time. So it's just it's close to my heart, and I talk about it all the time. So people who listen to our podcast, I'm sure you've heard this a million times. But this year, from a celebration point of view, sure, it was very anticlimactic. Like, I was in a New York apartment with loved ones, so I'm definitely grateful. And there wasn't like a huge big thing that happened, but we were there, and they are the people that I'm going to be spending a lot of time with going forward because we're collaborating on a new project. So it was the right place to be, but from a celebration point of view, for sure, it was anticlimactic. But in terms of what's to come for me in 2021, I am amidst a transition of pilgrimage proportions. So yet again, I am packing my stuff down, downsizing hard, and moving my home base back to the beautiful Mediterranean coast where I grew up. And what I'm finding most interesting is that I'm going to take a look at some old and familiar things with new eyes. So I feel like it's like that interesting. It's like a new year. I'm going back somewhere where I'm, familiar with, which also, of course, has changed because time changes all. And I get to sort of look at it with new eyes. I get to look at some existing relationships with a new perspective, looking at some of my family relationships and looking how they transition into friendships now. We've got in touch, we've stayed in touch, we know each other because of blood, but now I'm spending more time with them and transitioning into relationships, friendships, which I think is kind of interesting to me. So yeah, there's newness and there's oldness, and there is, here we are, a new year.
I love that. I love that idea of looking at something old and familiar with new eyes. Like that that language really resonates with me. It makes me think of, have you ever been to either a party, something social, or maybe like a work event for your partner, and you see them like talking to somebody else, another group, and everyone's laughing at what they're saying, and and you like look at them and it's almost like you're seeing them for the first time.
For sure. Yeah.
Or the other thing that visually came into my mind is like, my house, my living room. I have an open kind of concept living room, kitchen, office area. And it's like the hub of the house. And like we're all in there most of the time and it's chaotic and there are things happening. But on the days that, let's say, my partner is at work and my daughter is in school and I like come back from dropping her off and I open the door and it's quiet and like the light is pouring in. And you just like, I like look at that space for the first time in a new way. And so it's like, I love that idea. And frankly, honestly, that really resonates with me because nothing is going to change for a very long time. Right. I'm going to be in the same house with the same people for months to come. And maybe the only way for that to look and feel really new is to explore it with some new eyes.
Yeah, I think that's, in fact, that's kind of the only thing that you have control over. And that's what I'm most excited about. And initially, I've been on the road for decades and decades and decades. And sort of going back to where I grew up it was interesting to me. It was different. I had hesitations. Also, when I have previously gone back, it's been for short periods of time to visit, to say hi to people. I'm usually running around. And I guess to an extent regressing back to the ages that I lived there, which was very, very young, essentially like teenage years. So regressing back both in people's eyes because the only stories people have to tell me or points that we have to share are through those years, and then sort of just like running off again to gallivant around the world. And I think I spent a bit of time there the last few months. And I think people are also seeing me with new eyes. They're seeing me work, which is something they haven't done before. They're seeing me like day to day doing like hiking and running, or rather than just like these visits, which they're used to. So I think that there is newness all around, just the way that we see and receive each other, which is exciting to me. And I think similarly in any relationship, it can be a mutual effort to really kind of find new ways of seeing one another and new ways of connecting with one another.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because I'm thinking about, this time of these last few months in quarantine, and so many folks actually went back home and went to be with family and downsized. And, you were one of the folks who were like, why am I maintaining this New York apartment and paying all this money not to have space? I'm like, I'm going to go home. And that is something to contest with, is these ideas of who you were. And I think that's the same in relationships. Certainly that's something, in the work that I do with folks one-on-one. First, when they go through the process of pushing back on external expectations of who they were supposed to be and their internal noise of who they were supposed to be, the next step is like reintroducing themselves to the world. After you've pushed back on all those things and you've gone through that process of change, how do you then say to people who thought that they knew you, because you thought you knew you and that maybe was you and now you're different, is to be like, this is me now. And that reintroduction to who you are, that's really interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to talk in a little bit about how to sort of come up with some fun ways to change our status quo. And there are definitely things you can do to facilitate those new eyes, new point of views, and a way to sort of stay up to date with people, even though you might see them every day. There are ways to like essentially stay up to date with them.
Yeah,
we'll go through that for sure.
Yeah, so let's do that. Let's jump into it, because today we're talking about doing something new in the new year. And actually, I think we need to start with New Year's resolutions, because talk about status quo. If I hear New Year's resolution one more time, and I think that we can take like a foxy twist on an old way of thinking about resolutions.
Instead of a resolution, I feel like a debrief. That's kind of the work that I like to do with my clients. It's like a year debrief. Essentially, it's very sort of our background, corporate world, like corporate language, but like a debrief and a plan is what. And it feels to me more than a resolution. And I like to use the structure of what do you want to avoid, what do you want to create, and what do you want to preserve, going back into the new year. So it's a bit like a big State of the Union conversation with yourself, and then with any sort of partner or partners that you may have in your life. And the way to think about it is sort of looking back at 2020. the wonderful, challenging, went down on history year of 2020, and reflect on your life and your experiences, and think about what were the things that really didn't work out for you. What are the things that you, if you can help it, you just don't want to ever have in your life again? What essentially the things that you want to avoid, and take a stock of that. Make some notes, pen and paper, write things down, start journaling as much as you can, and then look at some of the things that you really, really enjoyed and you felt touched by, and you felt that you feel that you want to keep in your life, right? So the things that you want to preserve, that could be relationships, it could be dynamics, it could be how you felt at certain times. So really think about and reflect upon the things that you want to preserve in your life and what it would take to do that. And last but definitely not least, as you look into 2021, what are the things that you want to create in the world? What are the things that you want to make happen, you want to build? What are the connections maybe you want to make? So think about it in those terms. And it's just like a pro tip to how to do it is when you look at the things that you want to avoid, if you flip them, you can often come out with the things that you want to create. Right. So for example, if you say, I want to avoid, a really typical example that I want to say, most of us, me included, in 2020 felt lonely. And it's definitely goes in my avoid list. Like I ideally want to avoid feeling lonely. It's a yucky feeling. It triggers me down the spiral that isn't fun. It takes me a while to like lift myself up from there. So if I can help it, I want to avoid feeling lonely. So that would be on my avoid list. So when I'm reflecting, what I can do is look at that list and go, okay, what is it that I want to create? And it sounds, when I look at it, I go, okay, what I want to create is more connections, different way to connect, create situations, connections, communities where I can meet with people and feel connected. And so that would now what was once in my avoid list and now goes into my create list. Right. And again, I use this model with relationships all the time. So when you're doing a state of the union conversation, or when you're reflecting on your relationship, or if you want to, an annual checkup, which is something that I do with clients, look at the things that you want to avoid in your relationship and be very clear about them. So things like, I want to avoid conflict is not really helpful. To really understand, like, what is the conflict? What is the type of conflict you want to avoid? What is the common conflicts that you might have? And then see if you can flip them to see if you can put them into the creation list. And then they'll give you a plan for what to kind of work on going forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let me see. I'm going to do this right now. Okay. So what do I want? I want to avoid letting pride and embarrassment get in the way of something that I want. Shame. Yeah. Yeah. I think I want to preserve the connection that I was able to kind of build with my daughter over the past year. I think that before this, we were stuck in the day-to-day of like, breakfast, then school, then home, then homework, then dinner, and like our connection points were around those things. And I feel like I got to know her as a person, like as a human, and she got to know me more. And like, we laugh a lot now and just like have really deep conversations. And I really like her. I really like her. And like, so I want to preserve that and just learn the lesson of that, I think, about like being present with people. And then it's interesting because I think what you're saying about the opposite between avoid and create is true for me, in that I want to create more opportunities for creativity without letting perfectionism or shame or embarrassment or all those things get in the way. I have a head and journal full of ideas of things that I want to bring into the world, of poems and pictures and art and stories and Instagram posts and, all these things that I want to birth into creation. And something has held me back, either feeling embarrassed or feeling proud or feeling like it's not perfect enough, and I want to just create more. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is a bid for authenticity. Authentic self-expression, judgment-free, authentic self-expression.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what's interesting too? I think this goes back to what you were saying and what we were talking about earlier with like those stages of first you realize what about who you are has been impacted or influenced by external expectations, what is impacted by internal noise. And then when you find that core of like that untainted you and like putting that out in the world, I think I'm in that third kind of place of I've done the work. Like I know that I am doing the art, I am writing, I'm doing it, but I'm not yet sharing it. And so it's like the authenticity lives within my space. And I want to create more freedom for myself to just put that part out there into the world. More integration, I would say, and authenticity. Yeah.
No, I hear that. Makes me actually think of Brené Brown's work. I know that you follow her passionately, and she essentially she would say what's in the way is courage, or I should say what would enable that is courage, right? Because essentially it's vulnerability, and the only way to overcome vulnerability or do the thing regardless of feeling vulnerable is courage.
Yeah,
and it's just finding the courage to be like, okay, like I'm going to put it out there. It's very precious to me. And I'm going to be okay with whatever comes, you know.
Or even, and making room for things that are not precious. Like just putting, like my daughter has a TikTok account that I follow, of course. And so much of it is not good. So much of it is just like, what is this song? What is this? What are you doing? But she can create like 10 videos in like a day. And she's just like, puts it out. And one of her videos hit like 100,000 views. Many of them will have like 2. She doesn't care. Like and there's a piece of me that's like, wants to give her the feedback around like, no, you should focus on this more. You should curate them better. You should. And I'm like, no. First of all, by the time she's my age, she's just going to be like so bold because she's been putting all that stuff out. But I want to get a little bit more of that. I mean, we have friends within kind of either the kink community, the burner community who are really creative and fun and like put themselves out there in a way that you're in my corporate selves have not yet given ourselves permission to do. And so like, a little bit more of that.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah. Courage, right? It's just like balls. And I also think with your daughter, she's essentially doing a fast prototyping, right? She's learning, like you can give her feedback, but she figures it out anyway because she does so much of it all the time. And I think that's a complete different approach. I think, and I think this is also something that we've talked about before. Like you want things to be ready when you put them out there.
Right.
I prepare things as I am putting it out there. Like the process of just like telling people, putting it out there is where I learn and refine. I feel like your daughter is the same. Like we're kindred spirits in that way. Like I just have to tell the story to 5 different people and I'll be like, oh, and now I got it. And I think you just refine it internally until it's perfect, and then you put it out.
Right. It ruminates in my head. I mean, we had this conversation when we were together. And I was talking about just around like movement and getting more in touch with my body. And I was like, maybe I need to like journal about it or go to therapy or like talk through it. And you're like, no, you need to go dance. Like you can't think about your body and think about being in your body and write about being in your body. You're like, be in your body.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Like I only say this because that's what I have to remind myself. I'd rather open up an anatomy book and like look at all the muscles and all the neurology of how everything works. But ultimately, that doesn't help me. I just need to go and move, and then I feel better. You know.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Okay, so you said that you want to avoid the lonely feeling. You want to create then more opportunities for connection. Anything that you want to preserve from this past year?
Yeah, let's think about that. Actually, what do I want to preserve from this year? Wow, maybe not. Maybe it was that bad. No, that's not true. Let me think about this. This year, like I really connected with nature and I put my hands in soil almost every day for 6, 7, 8 months.
Yeah.
Once I like got out of the city and got used to living in nature, like living by the sea in some orange groves and like looking at things grow and be inspired by that, by nature. And I definitely would like to preserve that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I am moving back. Seeing if I can have a home base in nature. And still, of course, New York is where my heart is, like where my second home is. So I'm going to be spending time in the city, of course. But I think preserving that connection to nature, the sort of the revised connection to nature that I found, that I think is going to stay. Yeah.
I love that. You've had so many beautiful awearnesses as a result of nature.
I know.
It benefited both of us. So keep on doing it.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think it's as you know, this year I celebrated my 40th birthday, which I mentioned a few episodes ago. I think it's like good time to stop my gallivanting around the world, jumping from city to city, and like put some roots down next to things that are growing and grow with. So
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So as we're thinking about kind of what we want to create in the new year, you and I have been thinking also around the work that we do around love, sex, and relationships, and how to challenge the status quo in those areas. And we have been challenging each other to challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships, to practice what we preach. And so we wanted to have that conversation today too, and really make a suggestion to the foxes out there to choose one or two or three things you're going to commit to trying to create and do something different and challenge the status quo in your love life, your sex life, your relationships.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think what we wanted to do is encourage people to set some intentions, right? Specifically for the parts of their lives that are to do with love, sex, and relationships, and really think about what those intentions can be that will really change their existing status quo. And when we think of love, sex, and relationships in the context of our lives and the work that we do, we kind of think about love to be the emotions that are related to the way that we love, things like compulsion and jealousy and romance, and we include there in self-love, self-awareness, self-knowledge. For us, that all goes under love. And when we think about sex, we think of pleasure and play and health and anatomy and sexual intimacy and sexual expression, and we think of toys and kink and spiritual sexuality and all the ways that we express ourselves sexually. And when we are thinking about relationships, we think about connection and constructs and dating and partnerships and family, just the quality of the way that we connect to other people, connect to ourselves and other people. So that's kind of to give you an idea of the areas that we're inviting you to focus on. So your love life, your sex life, and your relationships.
And then, as opposed to just thinking about it, because of course this is all about challenging the status quo. So as opposed to just thinking, well, what do I want to do differently? Really analyzing, what is my status quo? What does it currently look like that I do every day in these areas? And how am I going to challenge that? How am I going to have a new perspective? How am I going to try something new? And so you and I are currently in different situations. You're not presently dating anyone, and I am in long-term partnerships with two people. And so we have some things that we've committed to differently, certainly, that we're trying to challenge the status quo on in love, sex, and relationship. And so I was thinking, let's give some examples of some of the things that you and I said that we're going to try. And actually, this will be good because now we're saying them out loud.
I know, right?
Thousands of people holding us accountable.
Yeah. We should do updates just because we now said it out loud. We should do updates.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with love. And as a reminder, love is kind of curating and understanding, being in touch with and communicating the feelings.
Right.
The good feelings, the bad feelings, but all the feelings that you have related to yourself or related to connection with other people. So for me, there are two things that I am interested in challenging the status quo around as it relates to love that I am committing to here on the record. One is and we talked a little bit about this in the beginning, right? To continue to get to know the people that I'm with, not just take them for granted, not just see them as the same person that I see all the time. Like I want more of those moments when I looked at them from across the room and they were saying something hilarious and everyone was so enthralled by them. And I was like, ooh, who's that? I want more of those moments. And so I think the challenge quo is that I see them in their day-to-day life. And we talk about our day-to-day life versus talking about who we are and what we want out of life. And so I want to try doing more intimacy games, like Holsty. We've used those cards before. There's a brand called The And. It's the fancy parentheses. I'm sure it's not called fancy parentheses. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. Fancy parentheses and. But both of these are just like decks of cards that you can use that have different questions on them. And you just set aside time with intention to like sit across from each other and like answer these questions. And they give you like the New York Times 36 questions. It gives you just a deeper sense of who the other person is via their answering of those questions. So I want to do that. And the second thing I want to do is right now, the status quo in my relationships is that we are very comfortable. I've been in one relationship for about 7-8 years, the other one for 2. And I want some of that NRE back. I want some of that new relationship energy that like, remember in the beginning when you just texting each other constantly and you're like, I'm thinking about you and I miss you and remember this and that. And it's just like flirty and like, I miss that. And right now it's like, are you going to use the computer? What time did you take the laundry out? Like those are what our text exchanges look like. Yeah. And so I have actually a Slack channel with my partner, and one of them is one of the channels within Slack is called Love Notes, and that was like in our NRE stage when we were writing love notes back and forth. But I think it's time to like reignite the Love Notes channel on Slack. We also have a journal that we would use to pass back and forth, like whenever we weren't with each other, and then so and write a few pages and back and forth. And again, that practice has long been forgotten. I would like to reignite that again. So I want to re-energize NRE and get back into those like lovey, sexy kind of banter conversations.
Nice. I love that. Bring on the flirting is what I'm hearing. Bring on the flirting.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is just good for anybody who's been in a long-term relationship. It's relationships waxes and wanes. That's just the way the nature of the relationships are. Love has its ups and downs, and that's again the nature of love. I think being intentional about flirting, being intentional about romance, being intentional about the pink and fluffies, I think is really, really important. And I know that it sounds like scheduling it is like almost feels like the opposite of what we're saying, but to have that allocated space and to really show up for that space is kind of what you need to do to reignite, right? So if you are, if your status quo is that you're in this like cozy, comfy, long-term relationship, good for you. See if you can like challenge that status quo a little bit and see if something comes up that might be exciting and new and interesting. So I love that. I also would want to say another suggestion for people who are like looking at their love lives, something they can change and challenge maybe, especially those people who are looking to open up relationships, some people who've just opened up, to really start a habit of feeding that core relationship, like really making room for love and romance in the core relationship, because it can be so much easy to be distracted by the shiny thing and put energy there and look for newness where there's like where it's like obvious, right? A new person is new, so it's kind of obvious to find newness there. To really make an effort to find newness in existing long-term relationships, I think that can be a way to like challenge the status quo within your relationships. So there's a couple of like suggestions. Personally, things that I am doing. I've noticed, and this is the feedback that I've been given, is that I am almost at a place where I'm too good with boundaries. Like people know where they stand almost too clearly. So it's like there's no room for error. I think that sometimes brings with some harshness, some edges that don't necessarily be there. And I think sometimes, at least I should say recently, the quality of the way that I love has been more around being supportive, being encouraging, being caring. And I want to work on being more loving without necessarily enable a state change, right? Because being supportive, being encouraging, being caring, those are all qualities that create a state change on the other person, right? Which I think is loving is something that you kind of just do. It's a way of being without necessarily wanting the other person to be differently, right? Or being sort of in an active way, right? You can just love. And I'm looking at ways of being loving while having boundaries, without necessarily having edges or affecting the other person, if that makes sense.
Right. That loving and being supportive is what it is, that it's not a tool that you're using to change something for the other person, or it's, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Which I think are on the surface noble, right? I'm a supportive friend, I'm a supportive partner, I'm an encouraging partner, but those are all, they're all initiate action on the other side. Like they are all ways of wanting or encouraging the other person to change. Right? It just sounds really noble, but it's not. I don't think they're actually kind of are rooted in acceptance. So I kind of want to take a soften, which is something that I know that I want to do, soften and be loving before I am supportive or encouraging or caring. Okay, when I start with this idea of loving and still like have faith that my boundaries are clear and that people will respect them and sort of tackle them from a loving place before I move on to being supportive or caring or encouraging and all those other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what I hear is both that word of acceptance, accepting who they are, but also, and it also sounds like accepting who you are and accepting the fact that you don't have to have control. You don't have to be the only grown up in the room and manage and ensure that they are respecting your boundaries by ensuring that there's no way they can cross them. Like you're making it like dumb, foolproof for them. And it sounds like what you're saying is, I want to show up more respecting who they are, respecting that they can respect my boundaries without creating an obstacle course around me that makes it impossible for them to cross my boundaries. And
yeah, that's kind of my just like looking at the status quo of love for me right now and what changes I can make. And I think the other one that I want to work on is I want to separate a sense of being safe with loving. That is, it's essentially where like attachment stuff lives, like sense of safety. The sort of the cross section of safety and love is attachment. I want to sort of look at those things and separate them as much as I can and find a sense of safety within myself and to love from a safe place rather than love to feel safe. I want to feel safe and love from a safe place, if that makes sense.
That not only that does that make sense, like something inside of me like shifted right now when you said that. Wow. To love from a safe place instead of love in order to create safety. Ooh, Effy. I just need a minute.
Those are my 2021 challenges.
Yeah, that feels like my decade challenge. Like that feels ambitious and amazing. And yes, I love that. I love that. Okay, so let's talk about sex. So challenging the status quo in terms of sex. I think the two things that I picked in this category are, the first is I want to connect physically without it necessarily being sexual or orgasm focused. I think that right now the status quo is currently, frankly, the topic of sex is a little tricky because there is an imbalance in my partnership between low and high libidos. I think that we are each responding to, quarantine and some of the anxiety of that very differently. And so, one person is high libido, the other's low, and that creates some like discomfort. And I think that being able to focus on connection without the pressure of sex is something that I personally want to initiate so that we can create more safety around physical intimacy and sexual intimacy without it being sex or orgasm driven. And then the other thing is I want to try some new like sexy time experiences. I'm going to take a deep breath as I say this. I would like to try more role play. And it is always something that I wanted. And I've mentioned it to my partner, but honestly, the status quo is that I currently role play in my mind because I'm sometimes just too embarrassed to ask for it. And I don't mean like costumes and this and that, though, again, like your kink is my kink and that's, it's not my kink and your kink is okay. Like that sounds great. I'm not even there yet. I'm more like, oh wait, we're not supposed to do this. Like, oh, like you're my best friend. Like, what's happening? We're at a sleepover, huh? Like it's kind of, but part of it was funny to me is even as I'm kind of jokingly saying that out loud. Part of me thinks that once we actually do that, I'm going to be like, no, I can't do this. But the reality is that there are times like in my head, that's the storyline. Where I'm like, we're at summer camp and like the lights are down and all the counselors are sleeping and like what's going on in our bunks. Like that storyline's like in my head. And so there's a curiosity of like, all right, well, what if that storyline is like named like out loud? And what if we like play into it? So yeah, so there's that. And then actually I think the last one is like invest more in like self-play, like making an evening out of it. Like my status quo right now is it's pretty utilitarian. So I want to like pull up all of our Stella Harris interviews and blog posts and like lean back into some self-love. So yeah, I want some sexy time.
I love that. Yeah. So not all fantasies are to be enacted, right? And I think that's just worth putting out there. Not all fantasies to be enacted. Things that might seem like hot and sexy and get you going in your head might just not feel like that out in the open, you know? So good for you for trying. And I'm so looking forward to the updates. I can't wait to hear the stories. I think also just to say that they might not work for you. You might, once you sort of say the words and like get into the act, it might not work. So it's okay. Whatever happens is okay. What I am hearing is like some, like seeking some subversity in your sex life. So you can do that through role playing, or you can actually kind of like get into a little bit of trouble.
I'm sure that this relates to like my church upbringing, which again, we have done many podcast episodes now with different folks where I like tell the story of like that I think there is something that's like intertwined in my brain. Like you've talked about this, like the early kind of neurons that develop that like the snow path with the skiers. And that the fact that now those are lines that are tread into my brain where it's like sex is wrong and bad and dirty and you shouldn't do that. And I'm like, oh no. But now it's like, you're married and you can have sex if you want to. I'm like, oh, yay. You're like, you mean I can just do it whenever? All right. But there's something that's like missing where I'm like, oh no, we shouldn't. That I want to reintroduce into my life.
Totally. Maybe just like go and get in trouble. Go and like have sex somewhere that's like not public, so you're not like shoving in like in front of people who don't necessarily want to see it, but like you know, you can go and get in trouble a little bit.
Well, before quarantine, I mean, I was hearing about like nude beaches at like after hours, like you know, things would go down, and I was like, oh, that feels like bad enough, but like it's still kind of sanctioned, like it's like the norm, even if it's and so like that I was gonna like dip my toe in that water, but then those waters shut down.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I mean, I think that's what the appeal of the play party is for me. Right. It's like it's naughty, but everyone's like consenting and knows what's going on. So I'm not gonna like upset anyone. Right. But I still get to be naughty because I can do things that are not necessarily sanctioned outside of that space. Yeah. So
so like the rule follower in me is still like wants to follow the rules, but I'm like dipping my toe into naughty. That's like how naughty can I, yeah.
2021 naughtiness. I personally sanction your 2021 naughtiness.
And my reporting back of my
for sure. Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, 2021, actually, I want to have sex. I haven't had sex in a while. So my current status quo is really not had sex in a long time. It's been like too many months. And I think it should never be too many months. I feel like, it's been too many weeks. I can get away with that, but it's been too many months. I'm like, okay, that needs to change. Just if nothing else for research purposes, it's like, come on, this is what I do.
It's a tax write-off. It's part of my job.
Exactly. So definitely want to reintroduce sex back into my life to challenge my status quo. And I'm interested in something that I haven't done before, and I would like to have this kind of crosses, straddles, I should say, sex and relationships. Like I have done most of my like fun exploration, sexual exploration with friends, and I kind of do my exploration with friends, and then in my more romantic relationships, it's been less exploratory, more kind of just like doing the thing. I would like to kind of maybe find and nurture a relationship where it's still romantic and kind of more on the relationship side of things, beyond friendship, I should say. Most of my relationships are foundationally friendships, but like beyond that, and still has room for exploration and play and kind of this, what I call high five sex. So kind of the sex that you have and then you high five afterwards. Like there's sex that you have and you cuddle and like pillow talk, and then there's like the type of sex that I have where you just like high five afterwards and just you're just saying, that was really good, everyone.
I totally know what you're talking about. Where you're like, let's get something to eat. Yeah.
And I tend to have those in separate relationships. So I have a bit of like segregation where I have like high five sex with my friends, and I have like more like cuddly, pillow talky sex with more my partners. I kind of want to merge those two and have it available to me in all my relationships.
Yeah. So, all right. So speaking of relationships, how am I going to challenge the status quo in my relationships? I think that I want to expand my love language, like my love language toolbox, if you will. I want to. Right now, I can love certainly very easily from my preferred love languages, and my less preferred love language, such as gift giving or gift receiving, I'm not as good at. And I think when my daughter was on the episode, she talked about that, about love languages and about the conversation that she and I had, and how gift giving is actually at the top of her list and the bottom of mine. And once we had that conversation, I have been much more actively giving her gifts, and she is much more actively physically affectionate and affirming, because those are higher up on my list. And so I want to be better at that practice. And so that is definitely something that I'm going to commit to, because my challenge quo is just to love how I like to be loved. I think a second thing is I want to install like a State of the Union conversation more often. We do the status quo is like that generally happens right now around anniversaries or the new year or during times of conflict. We're like, this is not working. We need to reevaluate everything. I want to make it more of a practice, like more of a regular, either quarterly thing, or I don't know what that quite looks like yet. I want to talk to my partners, but I know that's something that I want to institute. And then the third thing, as I was thinking about relationships that I want to challenge, is I'm better at this in my 7-year-long relationship than my 2-year-long relationship, but it's nurturing time together or separate in relationships. So I feel like in my 7-year relationship, we can be together but separate, if that makes sense, like doing our own thing. But together, and that's fine. In my other relationship, because it's newer, I still felt like, well, we're together, so we should be doing things together. If you're watching a movie, I should be watching that movie. If we're reading, we should both be reading. And I want to be able to do my own thing more separately, but together. So that's part of it. And then I think within that is just like nurturing our together time and nurturing our separate relationships, like nurturing her relationship with herself, her relationship with her friends, her relationship with other people, like just continuing to nurture the separateness and togetherness, and not just think about it as us being always together.
Love that. I think it's creating healthy space and really looking at all the other parts of your life and really sort of nurturing those, and then in that kind of healthy space in the middle. I love that. I think that's great. And the bigger the support network, the more the connections, the healthier the relationship. So I think that's a genius idea. And this idea of together, separate together. I mean, I call it alone together.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Being alone together is something that I love doing. I love being alone together. Especially at home, like you kind of like everyone's doing their own thing. You kind of ships in the night. There's no expectation. Everyone's doing their own thing. And then when you decide to like lock back in together, when you like, connect together, it's like, oh, it's good to see you. I love that kind of compartmentalization, mind tricks, mind gymnastics. I actually think they're really healthy for the relationship. If you can like master that and feel like there is room and space for that to happen. So love that. Love that. One of the things that I want to put in place for my relationships, similar to your sort of love language challenge, I think for me, going back to what I was saying about seeing old familiar things with new eyes, I want to actively do this thing that I call, and I coach my clients on, called clearing cache. And the idea is that our brains are amazing and they're efficient and they really care about survival and efficiency more above everything. And as an effort to do their best, our brains cache things and people. What does that mean? So just like a computer cache on your machine, your brain just remembers a version of somebody and kind of stores it. And that's where you go back to when you go back there, when you meet that person or thinking about that person. So the classic example, I've talked about this on the podcast many times. The classic example is, somebody comes home with a new haircut, the other person doesn't realize, and it ends up being about how, they are not, people don't care about them and there's no love and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, there is the main reason why it happens is because our brains have cached that person. We don't see, when we look at them, we're not seeing who they are in that moment in whatever they're doing, but we're just going to a cached version of them in our brains. And I think, going back home and reconnecting with my family, I actually have to clear cache. I have to clear cache of the people who I knew them as family and people that I visited, to now, like, who are they today? Like, who are they today? What is the challenges they've had in their lives? What's important to them today? How are they feeling today? And make that effort when I connect with people to kind of really check in. And I actually think that you and I do that really well. Like, I find that we sort of check in and clear cache when we connect. And I really cherish that. It's like, every time we have working sessions, and we have them almost daily, we do spend, a good few, up to half an hour every day to just be like, how are you? What's going on with you? How are you feeling? What's important to you? What's struggling, what you're struggling with? And I really cherish that. It's like we clear cache. Mm-hmm. I think we hold on to the essence of each other. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we're like, okay, like, how is Jackie doing today? How is Effy doing today? Like, where are we starting from? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that I want to really have a practice of across all my relationships. That's friendships, that's people I work with, that's my family, that's new friends, that's partners. So that's something that I want to, like, actively clear cache with people. Like, take those few minutes to be like, who are you? Where are you? How are you feeling right now in this moment? And I want to see you, acknowledge you, and then we'll take it from there. That's something that I want to put in place.
Yeah. I love that. It's true. How many times have we said, like, we ordered something, a meal or something for someone else, or a drink or something? They're like, oh, it's this. And you're like, yeah, don't you love that? They're like, I mean, I did. Yeah. But now, like, isn't that your favorite? I'm like, it was, but it's not anymore. And yeah, it's true. How can you pay attention to those shifts and make room to see those types of shifts? Yep.
Right. And allow the other person to change, to grow, to evolve. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes if people don't clear cache around us, if we don't get into a habit of clearing cache with other people, I think it can really stifle our growth and our development. So
yeah,
I'm considering that as a gift to myself and the people that I love.
I like it.
This goes back to what we're talking about, boundaries. I want to figure out a way to create lightness in my being in relationships, because I have a tendency, my status quo is to go deep, hard, fast.
Is there any other way, Effy? I mean, that sounds great.
Let's just dive in, which is great. It's great for me.
I know.
And honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. However, it is my status quo, and I do want to challenge it. And I want to see what it is like to be a light and to seek the depths of someone so quickly, and to kind of just enjoy lightness, enjoy mystery, enjoy curiosity, rather than like just seek the deepest crevices, nooks and crannies of the person's soul, which is like what I find myself. And it's what I do for a living. So
yeah, in the same way you want me to report back on role plays, I need you to report back on that. Like that. Yeah. I'm like, what is that like?
Yeah, I will be exploring that. I will let you know what is that like. But just like try this lightness thing that people talk about, and see if I can just like have a gentle curiosity rather than this like consuming, ravaging, intellectually ravaging curiosity that I think will get me to the depth of people. But I think there's something there to take your time.
Is it bad that like all the things that you're describing is that you don't want to do? I'm like, yes, intellectually ravaging. That's on my create list for 2021. Yes.
Yes, that's we're challenging the status quo.
Okay.
That's my
Good for
status
you.
quo.
Good for you.
Anyway, those are my things, and I think the invitation, right? Our invitation to our listeners is spend some time thinking about this stuff. What are your challenges? What are your status quo? What are the things that you do anyway? Like the things that you do anyway, and see if you can come up with something that is different, that will like shake things up a bit, and don't be too attached to them. Like try it, see what happens, experiment, see what change does to you. If it ignites something new and interesting, lean into it. If you're like I tried and like this lightness in relationships thing is bullshit and it's not working for me, let it go back to your old way. There's a reason when it was like that way. But I think the invitation is to like step outside the box for a second and see what it feels like.
Yeah That's the prompt. That is the invitation. 1 or 2, 3 things related to love, sex, relationships. It may be in love if you right now just struggle with knowing what you're feeling. Let's not even talk about knowing if you're in love. Like maybe you just get an app that helps you track your mood and your feelings. Maybe you start journaling to write down your feelings. Maybe you get more of a discipline about sharing your feelings. Maybe you grew up in a family that didn't say I love you, that didn't express it, and maybe your challenge this year is to talk about it. Maybe with sex you're going to talk about sex. Maybe that's not something you're doing.
Sex, people.
Yes. You could be that, or even it could be just on your own. Maybe you just are going to watch a different kind of porn. You're now going to navigate away from the algorithm on Pornhub, and you're going to look up some new things. You're going to look up some, I was going to say locally sourced, as if we were farming, but like some ethically curated porn. And maybe you're going to do that. Maybe in terms of relationships, you're going to reevaluate, like, are you contributing more to the relationship? Is a partner contributing more? Is there a way for there to be more like mutual work and contribution towards the relationship? Just do a self-audit and figure out what's the status quo, what do I want to avoid, preserve, and create, and where am I going to challenge some things and shake some things up. And then give yourself time. If change does not take hold right away. You mentioned Brene Brown earlier. Brene talks about FFTs, which are fucking first times. And she was like, fucking first times are terrible. She's like, the first time you do something, you're like, man, this is hard. And why aren't I good at this? And like, why does this feel difficult? And like, you forget each time, this is the first time you're doing it. It's not going to be easy. And so, she invites you to just sort of say to yourself, oh, wait, this is an FFT. This is the first time I'm doing this. Like my role play may not go well the first time. It does not mean I should not try again.
Yes, try again.
Yes, when you go on your date and your third question is about their childhood, you may be like, all right, too deep, too fast, Effy. Pull back. So just give yourself some time for the change to take hold. But hopefully this is going to create a little bit of newness and some energy in our lives in 2021.
Exciting. Also, sets it up for the rest of the year for us. We have so much newness planned for this podcast. We have so many guests coming up, and we are shifting our focus more and more to this podcast, the work we're doing here. So that is another layer of change and newness for us. So
we're going through some like rebranding stuff and new colors and who knows what's going to happen. If you want to know what's going to happen, you should follow us on Instagram at We Are Curious Foxes. You can find us on Facebook by the same name. You can look for us on Patreon. We love our patrons. Can we just take a second and say thank you to our Patreon members?
Thank you so much.
Our Patreon members have really supported this community, and so we are so grateful for them. And we're doing events for Patreon members and have exclusive podcast, little tidbits and bonus content and interview options. So it's cool. You should go onto Patreon, find us. We Are Curious Foxes. And then if you are enjoying the sound of our voices, if you laughed at any point during this episode, if anything we said sounded interesting, share it with somebody. Just press that little share button, that little icon, right? Just take a second and put like a star, 3, 4, 5 stars even. Rate it, put a little comment. We love that stuff. It really does make a difference for us. It helps us understand what kind of content is important to you so we can do some more of that. And then if you have ideas of things that we should be talking about, you can email us at listening@wearecuriousfoxes, or you could be a part of our next podcast episode where we answer guests or we answer Fox questions. So we answer audience questions as we did a few episodes ago. And you can leave us a question at 201-870-0063, or you can shoot us a voice memo at listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com.
Nice. This episode is produced and edited by the wonderful Nina Pollock, who puts a sparkle on the work that we do. Our intro music is composed by Dave Saha. We are so grateful for their work, and we're grateful to you for listening. As always, stay curious, friends. Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.